The Day They Burned the Books by Jean Rhys. Author's country of origin. Jean Rhys was born on August 24 in 1890 in Roseau, Dominica. This Caribbean island, officially Commonwealth of Dominica, is an American republic and belongs to the British Commonwealth of Nations. However, it was the Spanish the first European colonizers to arrive to the island. Christopher Columbus reached the island on November the 3rd in 1493 and named it after the day of the week in which they arrived, which was on a Sunday, in Spanish, Domingo. Though the first colonizers that managed to settle in the territory were the French, who founded the city of Roseau, which later would become the capital of the country. In 1763, the French ceded the island to the British, who turned the country into a British colony ruled by British authorities. Moreover, the emancipation of the African slaves in the 1830s provoked a disruption to the relations between the colony and the United Kingdom. By the 1890s, however, the British regained control over the island and turned it into a dependency of the British Crown, which means that the territory is no longer part of the United Kingdom, but still is under the sovereignty of the Queen of England. In the 1960s, Dominica became an associated state of the UK, and on November the 3rd, in 1978, the United Kingdom granted independence to the Commonwealth of Dominica, within the British Commonwealth of Nations. About the story. Jean Rhys's short story, The Day They Burned the Books, was published in Rhys's collection, Tigers Are Better Looking, in 1968, and is centered on the cultural clashes between the British and the British colonials, as well as the conflict of identity. The narrator and her friend Eddie are two English-descending children growing up in the Caribbean. The narrator is an English-descendant girl, while Eddie descends from an English father and a colored mother. The fact that they both have English roots and are growing up in a colony miles away from England makes the children struggle with their cultural identity. For example, when people who have never seen England before talks about it around Eddie, he remains silent, which gives the narrator doubts about home, which is England. On another occasion, Eddie claims that he does not like strawberries or daffodils, which are English, even though his father constantly talks about them. Meanwhile, the narrator states that her own relation with the few real English boys and girls, that is, children who were born and raised in England, were awkward. She remembers calling herself English and being told by the English kids that she is not English but a hurried colonial. To make this conflict of cultural identity even more tortuous, both children were also ridiculed by the black children for their British heritage. Moreover, as the story develops, we soon learn that Eddie's father is obsessed with his English heritage, praising the British culture and loathing the local folklore. He even expects Eddie to do the same. Eddie's father's obsession for the British culture was such that he had a room built onto their house to store his books from England. Eddie's mother, on the contrary, abhors this room and the books for what they represent, that is, English culture. Eddie's father's intentions are to force an English identity upon Eddie, while his mother tries to take this identity away. When Eddie's father dies, Eddie claims the room and the books as his own. One day, however, Eddie's mother and their housekeeper Mildred go into the room and start pulling books off the shelves and piling them into two heaps. Eddie's mother plans to burn one of the piles of the books. Eddie and the narrator try to prevent the books from being burned by both of them grabbing and saving one. Although Eddie does not want to be English like his father, he shows resentful toward his mother for burning the books, since those books are Eddie's closest tie to being English and the only thing left of his father.
Author's bibliography. Ella Gwendolyn Reese Williams, the woman who would become known throughout the literary world as Jean Reese, was born August 24, 1890, in Rousseau, Dominica, one of the former English colonies in the Caribbean. Reese was of Creole heritage. Her father was British while her mother was a native white West Indian. Perhaps most notably, Reese's great-grandfather was a slave owner who acquired a Dominican sugar plantation in the 19th century, but after the Emancipation Act was passed his state fell on hard times. Subsequent riots led to the looting of the house, which was eventually burned by arsonists. Reese visited her family's ancestral abode in 1936 and was extremely affected by the experience. Reese grew up feeling alienated and alone in the Caribbean. In 1907, at the age of 16, she moved to England for schooling, but after the death of her father, she was forced to discontinue her studies. She then drifted into a series of jobs that included chorus girl, mannequin, and artist model before working as a volunteer during World War I. In 1919, she married a minor Dutch writer by the name of Jean Lenglet. Reese's cultural background seeps into her stories and beacons forth depictions of her early childhood cultural values, methods of creating identity or autonomy, and unique social constructs of otherness. In Reese's short story, The Day They Burned the Books, a cultural tension arises between Western and Caribbean values, identity, and otherness that were personally relevant to Reed's early life growing up as a colonial or half-white, half-colored person. Reed must have seen firsthand the tensions between Western culture and Caribbean culture. These tensions between concepts are exemplified through her writings. Analysis of the story. Mixed race, cultural identity, and discrimination. First of all, it is important to define these concepts. Mixed race, denoting or relating to a person whose parents belong to different racial or ethnic groups. Cultural identity is the identity of belonging to a group. It is part of a person's self-conception and self-perception, and is related to nationality, ethnicity, religion, social class, generation, locality, or any kind of social group that has its own distinct culture. And finally, discrimination, treating a person or particular group of people differently, especially in a worse way from the way in which you treat other people because of their skin color, religion, or beliefs. In Reed's story, the little boy Eddie is in a unique position since his father is an educated British man who loved the Caribbean island, and his mother is an educated colored woman who grew up in the Caribbean island. In this concern, Eddie was inherently confronted with issues of cultural identity. The little boy does not feel British or Caribbean, and in some way he rejects the British culture. In the story, one example of this is when he expresses, "I don't like strawberries, and I don't like daffodils either." In this point, it is important to mention that both strawberries and daffodils are symbols of the British Empire. On the other hand, Eddie's father, Mr. Sawyer, is obsessed with his British inheritance and everything about the homeland. This can also be taken as an important reason why Eddie rejects the mentioned culture. In the same way, the narrator of the story does not feel English, and she also rejects the British culture, as she expresses in the story. "If I call myself English, they will snub me haughtily. You're not English, you are a horrid colonial. Well, I don't want much to be English. It is much more fun to be French or Spanish or something like that." During the story, it can be seen how Mr. Sawyer feels superior to his wife and how he treats her as inferior because of her skin color and origin. This leads to a situation of discrimination in which Miss Sawyer represents the victims under the colonial government, the colonized, and Mr. Sawyer, the colonizer. In the story, Miss Sawyer is treated as inferior by her husband just because she's a colored woman. This character is mistreated and humiliated the whole time with extremely offensive expressions such as, "Look at the nigger showing off," she would say, and she would smile as if she knew she ought to see the joke but couldn't. Finally, this mistreat reached to a physical level. The story went that once they had ventured to give a dinner party and that when the servant Mildred was bringing in coffee, he had pulled Miss Sawyer's hair, not a wig, you see.